I'm married to an Ashkenazi guy. All my brothers and sisters are married into Yemenite, Moroccan. Their kids, like my child, for example, right? He embraced Indian food, but how much does he know about Malida? But I think that a lot of first generation immigrants, no matter where you are in the world, go through this.
Welcome to 18 Jewish Foods, Culture and History in kosher bite-sized portions. This podcast tells the stories of iconic Jewish dishes, shedding light on the people who eat them. Here's your host, Joel Haber.
Many times throughout this podcast, I have said that Jews are the most globalized nation on earth. We have literally spread all over the world. And while I have represented Jewish diversity via the foods I've selected for this podcast, I've not quite gotten to a lot of the smaller or lesser known communities. This episode is dedicated to them. Many smaller, lesser-known Jewish communities feature different customs, practices, and even holidays of their own, and definitely unique foods for those communities. I want to highlight that via a special food of the Bene Israel community of India. Before I get to that specifically, I need to discuss the Indian Jews in general. Depending on how you're defining your terms, there are between 3 and 6 or even 7 different distinct Jewish communities in India. The 3 most well-known or largest communities are the newest of the 3, the Baghdadi community, immigrants largely from Iraq, as well as Iran and Syria, who arrived in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. But there are 2 large ancient Jewish communities in India. One from the southwest in the state of Kerala is the Kochini Jewish community, a community that claims roots that go back to the First Temple period and the time of King Solomon. But the community that I'll be focusing on in this episode is somewhat newer, although still ancient in its origin story. I must say that when we look at communities from around the world who have their origin stories, we can't usually confirm these stories. And that's why I'm referring to them as stories. I'm not claiming the stories are not true. There's just no way for us to know. However, you won't hear a community in America that claims that its roots go back to the time of the temple. And so we know at the very least that these are ancient communities. The Bene Israel live on the Konkan coast, which is between Mumbai and to the north of it, a city called Gujarat, and some of them live as far north even as Ahmedabad. They claim roots that go back to the 2nd century BCE, the story of the holiday of Hanukkah. According to Bene Israel belief, their community was founded by 7 couples who were shipwrecked during the 2nd century and washed up on the coast in the area in which they live today. Whether or not this story is true, genetic testing has proved recently that they definitely have ancient Jewish connections. In addition, they have a very strong connection with the prophet Elijah, Eliyahu Hanavi. I've heard from different sources, slightly different connections. One is that it was Elijah who saved these couples when they were shipwrecked. But there is another belief that there were members of this community that witnessed Elijah's ascension to heaven, or at least a vision of it, since he had ascended to heaven earlier than their shipwreck. The Bene Israel have their own holy site known as Elijah's Rock on the coast, and in it are indentations that are believed to be the wheel marks from when Elijah ascended to heaven. And it is this connection to Elijah the prophet that connects with today's food, which is Malida. Malida is both a dish and a ceremony. The base of the dish is a food known as poha, which is a rice product. Rice is parboiled and flattened and flaked, and then this is piled up with many different fruits. At the ceremony, many different blessings, or in Hebrew, brachot, are recited. Separate ones for different types of food, such as ha'etz, which is said over fruits, and ha'adama, which is said over those foods that actually grow in the ground. Vegetables or fruits such as bananas are also considered ha'adama. Ideally, also, there will be a fruit that has not been eaten in some time, so that a shehechianu bracha may be made. Also, fragrant spices or herbs will be included, so that one may make the blessing over bisamim, which is a blessing we make when we smell something good. In addition, at the ceremony, there is a song that is sung in praise of Elijah. Now, many have pointed out that some of the elements of the Malida ceremony overlap with other local non-Jewish food customs, but there are still numerous uniquely Jewish elements identifying this as a Jewish practice, even if it has incorporated elements from the wider community around them. And very much that is my point here. This community, the Bene Israel, was one of the most disconnected throughout Jewish history. For most of their existence, most Jews in the world didn't know that they existed, and they did not know very much about Jews outside of their own community. They developed many of their own unique customs, but they are still Jewish customs, even if they are not customs of all Jews around the world. My guest, Shulie Madnick, was born in Israel, but she is a member of the Bene Israel community. She is a food researcher and writer who is now based in the U.S., and I asked her to put the Malida ceremony into a more personal context. What I would love to hear from you is beyond the connections to the foundation story of the Bene Israel people and Elijah. People today, what is their emotional connection to Elijah the prophet during this ceremony?
That's a really good question. I don't, we're talking now third generation, fourth generation Israelis, right? If we are talking about my parents' connection, I don't think that they philosophically really dissected it. I mean, it was just a part of who they were. To me, as a child too, it's something that we just experienced. And Malida was a very special ceremony that no other community conducted in Israel. So it was very, very unique to us. And I don't think that we ever invited anybody outside the community either.
Not that it would have been frowned upon. It's just something that you didn't happen to do, yes?
We were going to the Malida ceremony. It was very Indian and very unique. And it wasn't something to show the world or be on a stage. Or today we do have with the second generation and third generation. So when we have weddings, so before the wedding, we have the Malida ceremony. Not everybody is doing it, but those who do, then you have all this collection of all these people from all over, Israelis from 50 different nationalities, right?
So let me ask you a couple of more technical things about the Malida. So first of all, there's a number of fruits that are typically on the platter, often a set number, 5 or 7. I'm curious, first of all, the significance of the number, but also, is there any significance to specifically which fruits one uses, or is it just to have fruits?
No, it's just to have fruits. It's for the blessings. 5 is for the Chamisha Chumsha Torah, נכון? Just I need to translate into Hebrew.
The 5 books of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses.
So our family did 5. I've never seen 7, but some families do 7. We did usually orange, banana, apple, pear, let's say.
And dates, yeah?
Dates, yeah. Dates for sure. So that's basically what I remember growing up, but it kind of evolved to whatever is available and what is in season. The dish itself is, some people say that they make it with semolina, like a couscous kind of a thing, but sweetened with, coconut and stuff. We didn't do it with semolina. We did it with parched rice, flattened rice. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I'm not familiar with it, but I've read about it. What's called poha, yeah?
Poha, yeah. So we did it with poha. You kind of rehydrate it. You squeeze it, the excess water out of it, and it kind of fluffy. You put cardamom, coconut, nuts in it. And so that was the base of the dish. We have the whole plate. It's like a thali. It's a large stainless steel kind of plate. And we kind of pile that up. It's beautiful. And then all the women would, after the blessings, all the women would take it to the kitchen and we'd cut up the fruit And then we used to have this, it was really sweet, the very traditional kind of white napkins, cloth napkins, and they would pass along in white cloth napkins a little bit of the Malida and a cut up fruit. Today, it's a whole production, a Malida ceremony or henna ceremony, which is the
before the wedding.
it's a huge production. A lot of people from it's like the Moroccan for end of Passover.
Mimuna.
The Mimuna, right? So people from all over, from all different communities come and they want to experience the Mimuna. So it's the same thing with the Malida.
I've also read that it is frequently done not just for life cycle events and for auspicious occasions, but also for Tu B'Shvat. Did you or do you still also do it on Tu B'Shvat?
Tu B'Shvat, what they're saying is that when the 7 couples were washed ashore, it was on Tu B'Shvat. So they're having the Tu B'Shvat. I was not familiar with it. My mother was not familiar with it, and she grew up in Mumbai.
So your family did not do it for Tu B'Shvat?
No. So my family never did it for Tu B'Shvat, although in my research, I found out that it is done for Tu B'Shvat. And on Elijah's work, the Indian Jewish community were making picnics and a Malida ceremony at the rock.
And I've heard that in Israel, some would go to what's called Elijah's Cave to do the same thing there. I don't know if that's something that you ever heard of in Israel or not.
I never did. My mother went a couple times.
Were you able to find poha in Israel when you first got there? Or did you have to make it yourself?
No. Poha was available early on in Israel. A lot of people who could afford it, because my parents could never afford going back. So they never went back. But a lot of families would go and visit India, and they would have extra suitcases with ingredients.
So those were the kinds of ways that you might get poha, because it wasn't sold in regular stores, I assume.
I think that back then it was more available. There's other things that was not available, but today pretty much everything is available in Israel. I think that I embraced my Indianness only after I met my husband. He embraced it more than I embraced it, which is really strange to say. But yeah, I think it took me probably in my 20s to embrace all this and embrace my culture, embrace and appreciate it. The information and traditions are just dissipating because of the modern era kind of a thing. And people are not interested. We have a lot of mixed marriages, right? I'm married to an Ashkenazi guy. All my brothers and sisters are married into Yemenite, Moroccan. Their kids, like my child, for example, right? He embraced Indian food, but how much does he know about Malida? But I think that a lot of first generation immigrants, no matter where you are in the world, go through this.
In addition to the Malida, the Bene Israel community has other foods that are uniquely theirs, though not necessarily with the same kind of religious significance that the Malida has. One example for the upcoming holiday of Rosh Hashanah is called Chikcha Halwa. It is a wheat-based sweet, and Shulie explained to me that it was primarily eaten just for that reason, for its sweetness, the way that apples and honey are almost universally eaten. Also, in India, wine was hard to come by. And so for Kiddush on Friday night, most Jews around the world will make their Kiddush over a glass of wine. The Bene Israel made a drink known as sherbet that was using black currants. Of course, once most of the Bene Israel moved to the state of Israel, where wine was readily available, they began to use that instead and ceased really to make sherbet for Friday night. Other communities spread around the world have their own practices and holidays. For example, back in episode 5, I discussed the Mimuna festivities of Moroccan Jews and their food mufleta. And Tunisian Jews have a Seudat Yitro, or Jethro's feast, that is full of sweets and is aimed at celebrating their sons. And yes, they do also celebrate their daughters at a separate festivity during Hanukkah. Some communities are less known among world Jewry, even though their numbers were once very large. The Romaniote Jews of Greece and Turkey go back to the time before the Second Temple was destroyed. They are an ancient community that has their own prayer rites and special foods. But they were largely overshadowed by the massive influx of Sephardic refugees following the 1492 expulsion from Spain, and many more of them were murdered during the Holocaust. A great source to learn about Greek Jewish food is Nicholas Stavroulakis' book, The Cookbook of the Jews of Greece, and the Yanina Synagogue. Yanina is a city in northwest Greece that had a large Romaniote community. The Yanina Synagogue on New York's Lower East Side has an annual Greek Jewish festival that's a street party. Like the Bene Israel, other communities were also very isolated from world Jewry. Perhaps the most famous today are the Beta Israel of Ethiopia. After their successful immigration to Israel in modern times, they are much better known now, and their foods are eaten widely across Israel. But one example of a food custom that is unique to the Ethiopian Jewish community is that the prohibition against mixing milk and meat was not applied to poultry, as it was within mainstream rabbinic Jewry. On the Caucasus Peninsula, between the Black and Caspian Seas, we can encounter a group known as the Mountain Jews, also known as Kavkazi Jews, in Azerbaijan and the southern Russian republics, such as Dagestan. Not only were they separated from the bulk of world Jewry, they were even largely separated from each other due to the mountainous topography of their region. And therefore, some of their foods have different names for the same dish. Or more interestingly, the same name is sometimes applied to different dishes. For example, gendumedush, for some Mountain Jews, is a version of a Shabbat stew, what I discussed back in episode 3. And it uniquely blends both Russian and Central Asian influences. But for other Mountain Jews, gendumedush is a wheat-based food that is used as part of a folk custom when a child gets his or her first tooth. And finally, there are other Jewish communities that were once quite numerous, but have faded to near obscurity. Around the Caribbean, Jews there are a great example of this. The Dutch-connected Jewish communities of Suriname and Curacao, for example, were strong and numerous long before the United States became the center of Jewry in the Western Hemisphere. In Suriname, there was even a town known as Joden Savannah, Jewish Savannah, and the oldest synagogues in the Americas are from these two countries. By now, however, those communities are relatively small in number and have also been overrun by largely Ashkenazi immigrants. But pom, the national dish of Suriname, is recognized widely as having largely Jewish origins. It is similar in way to a kugel or even a yapchik, but it uses chicken, citrus juice, and pom tire, an indigenous root vegetable that is also known as American taro. Unfortunately, I don't have time to discuss the many, many more small and scattered Jewish communities around the world, but hopefully this gives you a taste based on the diversity of the foods, how diverse the Jewish people really, really are. And if nothing else, our spread around the globe has helped us to fulfill our mission of being a light to the other nations of the world. In my next episode, my guest will be Hasia Diner, and we are going to be discussing the bagel. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed. Got any questions or comments? Please feel free to email me at jewishfoodbook@gmail.com. Please listen, like, and follow wherever you get your podcasts, and I would truly appreciate it if you'd share this with other Jewish food lovers. The theme music you hear is Adir Hu Revisited by Rebbe Soul. Check him out wherever you stream music. And as always, until next time, I wish you B'tei Avon.